I was functioning while, I was in a suit functioning all day, but I had a glass of vodka by my bedside, 3 in the morning to stop the shakes.
What caused you to steal in the first place?
And they said, you're going to need a liver transplant. Otherwise, you're not going to live.
What did your wife think when you broke this news? You probably just dropped a bomb on her.
We get to R&D and he's like, take off your clothes. I put another uniform on. They had another name. They shackled me with the waist, wrists, feet. And they were like, they put me in a van. I'm like, can you tell me what's going on? Where are we going? So he's like, the doctor's saying you're having like liver rejection or something. We're taking you down to the hospital, Beth Israel.
Joseph De Gregorio went from Wall Street success to federal prison, battling addiction, fraud charges, and a liver transplant that nearly killed him. Joe, welcome to Logged In. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you kindly for having me.
Yeah, we were just talking about all of our mutual connections. It's funny to see how the prison community it's a big world, but small at the same time.
Very small block.
Yeah, and Justin, who has his own prison consultant company. Is that what you call it, prison consultant?
So it's a full sentencing mitigation firm, pre-sentence and post-sentence, and I implement a lot of very unusual mitigation strategies to get the maximum sentence reduction and the minimum time served for my client. And I consulted over 400 cases now, and now I get hired by, top law firms in America. I have a good relationship with a lot of them.
So your focus is on the individual before sentencing?
Before sentencing and after as well. I get hired after sentencing. There was an individual who just recently got sentenced to 20 months. They hired me post-sentencing, and I created a reentry plan for him. I told him how to present this to the case manager to get it into the central file and build it, and he was let go after 4 months. And his lawyer left the recommendation on my LinkedIn. He said he never seen anything like it. He served 20% of the time. Actually, when the lawyer called me, he said, Joe, I have a client, if you do that reentry plan for him, how long do you think he'll be out? And I said, Richard, I don't know, maybe like 6-7 months. I said, it really depends. He says, no, get out of here. He didn't believe it. And meanwhile, he got out in 4 months. He only served 20% of the time.
I wish I had you when I was in prison. Do a lot of the new laws kind of help your ability to do these types of things?
Yes. The First Step Act, the biggest mechanism in the federal system in decades, they have productive activity mentioned in there. It's not a specific credit, but, you want to be as productive as possible and maximize the time in there. So when someone surrenders to prison with a release plan, they need to add to it, they need to build it. And little things like writing a book report. And I know it sounds very grammar school-like, and it is, but it goes a long way in prison. Put together an Amazon book list before surrendering. Read with a purpose. I'm not just saying, read any book, but you want to read with a purpose, something that's going to help you later on in your future. So, you write a 1-page book report, why I read the book, what I learned from it. You give it to the case manager like once every 6-7 weeks. You don't want to inundate the case manager. You want to have a good relationship with him or her because they're the most important person to us in prison. So write a monthly assessment on yourself, a monthly report card as well, the classes that you're taking, what you're learning in those classes, doing your job, etc. You want to separate yourself from everyone in prison, and you want to become that purple cow because unfortunately we get looked at the same, and you want to prove worthy of why you're worthy to go home early because it's certainly not a right. It's the biggest privilege in the world to be let out early. So, and the case manager is a very, very cynical person, so they look at us all the same until you separate yourself, just like in the courtroom with the judge. You have to separate yourself from everyone. So it's a full service sentencing mitigation firm. It's really focused on white collar, but I've been doing, also drug cases as well. But I like to work with people who are accountable and they own what they did, kind of like myself, I came forward. Basically, I turned myself in, and we'll get into that. But it's good because now I get to pick and choose with who I want to work with, and the pipeline of referrals is more now from to law firms, and I was just on the American Bar Association, and I was just 3 weeks ago today, I was just published in Bloomberg Law. So it was a big deal for me to become a published author of Bloomberg Law, and they want me to write again. And now I'm like a reoccurring contributor to Bloomberg Law. I don't practice law. I'm not a lawyer, but it's an honor to be here, and I don't believe in coincidences anymore in life.
Yeah, you were just telling me this is the date that you got released from prison? What was the significance of this date?
So this date, December 29th, 2025, 3 years ago from today, I was let out of the Boston hospital and sent back to Devon's because I had liver rejection in prison. Because when I surrendered November 17th of 2022, I was put in quarantine. I was put in the shoe for 7 days, and they didn't give me my medicine. So I got extremely sick, and within a month, they had to rush me out of the prison. And I was in the hospital from December 12th to December 29th, ankle chained, two guards by my side. I had severe rejection. I had this machine that was, pumping my body. It was called ATG, and it made my arms blow up and everything. I couldn't call my wife. My wife had no idea where I was. And December 29th of 2022, they sent me back to the prison, and they put me in the shoe again until January 5th.
Well, I guess happy anniversary. I don't know what the
Thank you.
opposite
Thank you.
of that is, but it's good to have you here, and thank you for reaching out and support. And we'll
Yes.
have the link to your website in the description of the episode too for everyone to check you out who's in need of your services.
Thank you. I'm willing to help anyone.
Where'd you grow up, Joe?
I was born in Brooklyn. I was born in Sunset Park. And then at 2 years old, my family, we moved to Bensonhurst, Italian American family. My father came from Italy. I'm first generation. And great, great upbringing, very, very tight knit community. Went to Catholic school, and I had a schoolyard right across the street from my house. Um, I grew up on 71st Street between 15th Avenue and New Utrecht, for anyone that knows that. And I had a PS 112 was across the street. I was always playing baseball. My life was baseball. I was on the Catholic school baseball team. I was a catcher. I was playing softball in the schoolyard, fastball, wiffle ball, stickball, and I was collecting baseball cards. And I would buy the price guide every month, and I would price my baseball cards. So that's kind of like the similarity with Wall Street with me, with how I pivoted into that right out of high school.
What'd your
And
parents do for work?
my father was a machinist for Con Edison. He worked in Long Island City at the time. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She took me to all my games, my practices. She was actually part of the Little League coach when I was young.
Any siblings?
Two older sisters,
Were you guys close?
very close.
And aside from being into sports, how would you have described yourself?
I was really Yankees are my life. Growing up, Don Mattingly was my favorite baseball player. I loved fireworks. We would have great Fourth of July shows, and it was just a great upbringing. I have your BMX bike. And it was I was confined, like, not to, like, I was always in that neighborhood where I grew up. I was either on 15th Avenue, 13th Avenue, 17th Avenue, and then we moved to Staten Island when I was 14 years old. I went to Susan Wagner High School, did good in school, and then right after high school, I went directly to Wall Street.
What were some values your parents instilled in you as a kid?
Um, Working hard, the value of a dollar. I had a paper route in Brooklyn, and I remember getting the Sunday paper early in the morning on 17th Avenue. I had to bring it back to my house, put all the coupons in there. It took forever, and then when I went to collect, it was I would get a dime or a quarter or something like that, and this was like 1984, 85. I was about like 9, 10 years old. But, it was, to be honest worker, good upbringing. To be honest, it was, to be considerate to other people, to be there for other people. Just great values all around.
How does Wall Street first come into your mind that you wanted to do that?
Around junior year in high school, when some of my friends' older brothers were working on Wall Street and did very well for themselves, and they were going directly to Wall Street too. So it was actually my brother-in-law's best friend that he was working. He said, come to work with me, and basically, give you a stack of leads, and they tell you to make 500-600 dials a day. I didn't like it at first, and then I would do like construction. I was doing some odd jobs. I was doing roofing, and I'm afraid of heights, so that job didn't last quick. And then I went back, did really well. I remember opening my first account and walking it up, and they tore it up in front of my face, and they were like, nothing under $10,000. So I was like, I was like, you work so hard to pitch and open a guy on a telephone, and then, but then I went to a firm, U.S. Securities and Futures on 100 Wall Street, started working with guys from Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania. They had a huge trading floor. They had a bond pit, an options pit, a credit market pit, and I started just taking everything in, and I would be at the office at 6:15 in the morning till 10:30, and they saw how hungry I was, and slowly I started building up a book of business, to $1 million, then to 10 million. And then I started really studying the market. At first, I was studying fundamentals, balance and income statements, 10Ks and 10Qs, to like look to the future and see the earnings of a stock. But then when I started working with these guys, they called certified master technicians, CMTs. They're all about charts. And so when I started studying charts, that's the crystal ball for me. And not that I threw the fundamentals out the window, but I was just looking at a chart. Like if you would give me the symbols, I wouldn't look deep into the earnings. I'd look at the charts. You could do a bunch of different studies on it. You could see where the stock is going. And really it was consistency that, it would be like 6 out of 10 stocks that I would do well on, when other guys at the firm, maybe 2 or 3, they were batting 200-300. And then from there, it was like all referrals started coming in around 2003, 2004. All my clients started sending me 2, 3 of their golfing buddies, 2, 3 of their business partners. And then it grew to, at over 50 million under management. And my clients were all speculative traders. And so when I first got my license, my Series 7, and I passed it in 6 weeks, I studied full time for it. I started pitching the richest zip codes in America. I basically, I searched for the richest zip codes in America. I bought my leads from, there was a lead person, for all the firms. And I just they're hard. They're hard to get. I mean, they're big guys, but all you need is like a few of them, and then to make them money. And then, so my business grew quick. And then in 2007, I was working at a firm on 40 Wall Street, and they gave me my own office. They give you a big sign-on bonus to come on to the firm, and every time I would go to the ticket window, because it was still at the time where when you got off the phone with a client, you had to write out the buy-sell ticket and bring it to the ticket window, and they would execute the trade. And there would be a group of brokers. They always wanted to know what I was buying and selling. And, then I helped some guys. I really didn't want co-callers. Like everyone had co-callers. I just wanted to focus on my business. Really wasn't hanging out at all. I didn't have a girlfriend. I used to wake up to Bloomberg. I watching TV, go to bed to it. I used to work on Saturdays. I started pitching overseas accounts. I started pitching the UK. I started coming into the firm sometimes at 3:30 in the morning, 3 o'clock, and started pitching UK. I wanted an international book, and I got some of those clients as well, which I did well. And then 2008 happened, and So August of 2008, the owner of the firm that I was working at took like the top producers to the Bahamas. And so it was like 5 or 6 of us, and at the time, as soon as we got there, the market r started collapsing, and this was really at the infancy stage of the, collateralized mortgage obligation, the crash that happened. The owner of the firm never came out of his hotel room, and, we were, knocking on the door, telling him to come outside. And, finally he opened the door after day three, and, he was just glued to the CNBC. And he says, look at what's going on. And, I knew what was happening because my sales assistant was calling me, and I was talking to some clients. So we raced back to New York. I had clients in Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Lehman Brothers, Fannie Mae for a while, AAA rated to the end. It was like a 6% dividend. Lehman Brothers was a 158-year-old institution. If you would have told me that one was going out of business, I wouldn't have believed you at the time. And it did on September 8th or September 15th, one of them. It was a Monday, September 15th of 2008, where Fannie Mae had come in, that was out of business, Lehman Brothers. And, every day you come in, you see your money line imploding and just getting less and less. And you're not intentionally wanting to lose your clients' money. Affected me severely. I was at the firm until 2:30 in the morning, 1:30 at least, talking to everyone. And I had a few arbitrations, and arbitrations is when a customer sues you civilly for lost amount that you lose them in the market. There was a lot of lawyers at the time after the 2008 crash that was sending out contingencies letters to everyone. They were like, "We'll take on your case for free. We'll get your money back from the broker who lost you money." And three of my clients did do that, and I settled with all of them in 2011. And it was a destroy and rebuild process. Not only did my book get destroyed, but I everything that I earned, I gave it back. So it was, and then that was 2011 when I settled the arbitrations. So by this time, between 2008, 2011, there was so much going on with the brokerage business. The owner of that firm killed himself. Um, on 40 Wall Street, the owner that didn't come out of his room, and he wound up committing suicide in his house in Minnesota. And a lot of brokers left the business. I stayed, I rebuilt it, but it was then and only then where I started to drink. We would go out. We were like trying to, I don't know, escape or numb the pain, or, guys called it liquid lunch on Wall Street. They said, let's go out, for a drink, and started going out to dinners and, or lunches. And one thing led to another, a very slippery slope with drinking. And then in 2011, it got even worse. And then in 2015, just continued to get worse. My health started rapidly. I was functioning while, I was in a suit functioning all day, but I had a glass of vodka by my bedside, 3 in the morning to stop the shakes. And, I was rotting on the inside, and totally distorted my lens. Um, Became a Jekyll and Hyde. I didn't. The snowball going downhill happened so quickly, and I destroyed my liver. And in June of 2020, in the middle of Manhattan, in the middle of COVID in Manhattan, the epicenter, I had a full liver transplant. I was never on the list, and I got rushed to the hospital in Staten Island June 26th of 2020, and they had all the COVID protocols in place where you couldn't go to a hospital unless it was COVID related in New York City, at least in the five boroughs. And I was completely yellow. I was 300 pounds, filled with bile. I had bruises all over my legs and all over my body. I couldn't put dress shoes on. I'll show you the pictures. And so when they rushed me to the hospital to Staten Island, June 26th, I don't remember because basically I drank myself into a coma. And I woke up at New York Presbyterian Columbia University Hospital on 168th Street, Manhattan. And I had two hoses on each side of my waist. They were connected, just the yellow bile that was coming out of my body. And I was hooked up to a lot of different things. And they said, you're going to need a liver transplant. Otherwise, you're not going to live. And they have what's called a MELD score, MELD. It goes from 0 to 40, and 40 being the most severe. And I had a 40 score, so I wasn't going to live long at all. They said, the doctor told me, I'm surprised you're still alive. And so s- so long story short, they wanted to see if I would be able to withstand a liver transplant. And if I tell you what was going on in that hospital at that time in July of 2020, um, just people dying everywhere. I thought there was no way I was going to make it out of there alive, especially with the shape that I was in, and everyone in there for COVID. And um, then finally, July 21st of 2020, doctor comes in my room, and I was in a room with a big room with other people. And he says, we have the perfect liver for you. We're gonna do the transplant tomorrow. And I didn't believe it. I didn't know, like, I wasn't all there. I was maybe 10% cognate at the time. They had me heavily detoxing. They had me, I was laying in bed the whole time. I never got up, um, needing to get with the nurses, cleaning, taking care of me constantly. And so July 21st of 2020, they gave me the full liver transplant. It was 13, 14 hours. They said it's like 8, 9 hours. And after I woke up from that, I'm in a glass room in ICU, and everyone around me was on ventilators. And I, you know, I woke up. I didn't even know I didn't know what was going on. I woke up, I had 110 staples down my body. They call it like the Mercedes Benz incision because it looks just like that. It goes down and both on sides, and I had these giant staples, oozing out. And I'm in the bed and I'm looking around, and the hazmat suits, staff, doctors, nurses, they were just full hazmat with, with these breathing apparatuses. They weren't just wearing regular masks. And the doctor comes in and he says, the liver we gave you had COVID in it. The liver had COVID in it. And he said, we're going to start treating you. And I just woke up from intubation, and I still maybe 5-10% cognate at the time. And so they started treating me with, I had 106.8 fever. My body started attacking the liver, so I started having liver rejection right away. And they gave me remdesivir, convalescent plasma, and high dose of IV steroids to try and stop the rejection. I mean, to try and stop the COVID. They were treating me for the rejection as well. So now I'm in the glass room in ICU, and I see them coming in, the nurses, everyone coming in, and they were bringing in the ventilator. And I remember them just putting the tube down my mouth and with this mouth strap, and they put this over my face, and I just remembered. I don't remember how long I was on it. I know now, but I was on the ventilator for 10 days. I woke up from that, and when I woke up from it, you have the tube down your throat, so you start choking. And they saw me. I'm in the glass room, so the nurses see you, when you wake up, and they came rushing in. They rip the tubes out. They vacuum in all the liquid from the inside of your lungs and your stomach. And within not even 2 days, I think it was 12 hours or so, I had no concept of time. Um, I felt both of my lungs like an accordion just collapse, and I had double respiratory failure. And I just remember I was in bed, and also and I just, so the nurse saw, they come running in. I hear her telling the doctor he's having, both of his lungs just collapse. And I saw them bringing in the ventilator. And I said, this is it. There's no way I'm going to wake up from this again. And because I learned afterwards that when you're on the respirator, the ventilator, it's pumping your lungs. So when you come off of it, your lungs are like weak, and it's used to the pumping. So double respiratory failure was common because I don't know how high the machine was on. I mean, I don't know all the particulars with that, but I couldn't breathe at all. And then I just remember them putting the tube down my mouth, and they were calling my wife to tell her to come up. And they let my wife come up for 3 hours a day. My wife was there for every single day for 4 months that I was in the hospital, from June until October of 2020. And so, so I was on the ventilator that time for 8 days. I woke up from it. And when I woke up from it, and being on the ventilator, I remember hearing my dead uncle calling my name the way he used to say my name in Italian. I remember I was traveling. It was very surreal. And then when I opened my eyes, there's a priest at the end of my bed. And I don't know if he was giving me the last rites. I don't know if they expected me to wake up. But I call my wife. My wife comes up. Again, I'm still in ICU in the glass room. Everyone around me is on ventilators. 85% of the people aren't waking up. I'm seeing the white sheets being poured over them, pulled over them. And I woke up. Now I had sepsis. Then I had septic shock. Then I had cytomegalovirus, which is this blood infection. Because when you have a liver transplant, they use these giant clamps. Like when they cut you, they pull you open, like I don't know, like pop a hood or something, however you want to think of it. And I actually saw a video on it when I came home, what a liver transplant was. And so people do get CMV, the cytomegalovirus, because your body's just wide open, and just any sort of bacteria could get in there. And so then they started treating me with that. And still in bed. So now this is like end of August of 2020. I'm in ICU for a full month now, and finally made it to the transplant floor. I was in ICU for 6 weeks. So the first week in September of 2020, it was like in the middle of the night, and I was fighting to stay up. I didn't want to fall asleep because I thought I wasn't going to wake up. And I just wanted to see my wife the next day. I just, like, when my wife came to the hospital, I cried when she came in. And I'm not afraid to admit this. I cried when she came in, and I cried when she left, because I just wanted to see her the next day. Like, she was the reason why she's the hero in the story. I'm just the guy who stayed alive long enough to make it up to her. But and they said, you're getting out of ICU. We're gonna take you to the transplant floor. And so I had these giant staples, and I'm in so much, you're in so much pain. And then A transplant floor was like from heaven. It was just beautiful. It was like a couple of doors down from Bill Clinton's designated room. Like he had like these 5 rooms combined into one. ICU was hell, and the nurses and they saved my life. And then the nurses in the transplant floor, they all heard about me, and they're like, we heard about you, and you know, we're so happy that you're here, that you made it here and everything. And um, I had to learn how to walk again because I wasn't out of bed the whole time. Pooping yourself, pain, and then when they clean you, they push you to the side, and you have 110 staples. It was just like, you know, um, but then the feeling of getting up from just getting myself to sit up in bed, and then the physical therapy guys, they were all great. I mean, everyone was just, they were my angels. And then, I remember just feeling like I Pinocchio with the strings. I just collapsed. I had no core. The first time I tried to get up from the bed, I just collapsed on the physical therapy guy. And I just remembered like, oh wow, I cannot walk. And when you're laying there for, all of July and all of August not waking up, I had such severe atrophy and you think to yourself, yeah, I could walk. I mean, it's walking, and then when you realize you can't, and you can't even get your feet in front of you, and having no core. And then I went through a very, very deep, acute therapy. And, it was just first standing up from bed and then walking. And again, my wife being there every single day, driving in from Staten Island to 168th Street. It was like in Washington Heights. And, she's there by herself. And there was a lot going on in Manhattan at the time. I believe there were riots going on um, for George Floyd riots, and so there was just a lot going on. And I made it out of the hospital October of 2020. And I was sober for the first time in years. And I get a phone call. My mother says, Monsignor Jeff wants you to call him. Now, Monsignor Jeff is the Monsignor who married me and my wife. My parents go to the same church for, 30 years on Staten Island. He found out I had a liver transplant. So I call him. I'm like, hey, Monsignor Jeff, how are you? He's like, I'm good. He goes, listen, I know you're not able to drive yet, and I want you to come have dinner with me at the church rectory on Thursdays at 5:30. I said, okay. He says, and then after, we're going to go downstairs to an AA meeting at 7 p.m. I said, okay. I'd never been to AA before, had no idea what it was like, just from what I see on, or I saw on television, or what you hear about. I had no idea Monsignor Jeff was 43 years sober. He was like such a big figurehead with AA in the New York City area and like the 5 boroughs. He saved so many people's lives. And it was divine intervention. I had a resurrection from that hospital, leaving the old Joe behind and coming out with never being on the list. Everyone else, you saw so many people who didn't make it out of that hospital. And then, so I went there with a walker, went to have dinner with him and 3, 4 other long-term sobriety people, 36 years, 28 years. And I told them what just happened to me. They. And then we went downstairs to a meeting. Couple of weeks, I didn't say anything. I was just taking it all in for like the first couple of weeks. And then we would go upstairs after the 7 p.m. meeting. It was like from 7 to 8. And then from 8 to 10, I would read the big book with Father Jeff. And then I did my steps with him. And when I came out of the hospital and I was sober for the first time, and having to still be on this earth, and, you realize the destruction you left on the ground. I saw, I had clear skies, and Ian, I saw that I left destruction down below, and I had to atone for what I did. So I one day, it was after the AA meeting. We were upstairs reading the big book, and it was just me and Father Jeff. And I was like, "Listen, Father, I got to talk to you." He goes, "Yeah, what's going on?" I said, "Listen, I I I did some that I have to atone for. I have to come clean. I have to turn myself in." And I told him what I did. I got greedy. I stole from clients, long term clients. Um, didn't matter if it was in the throes of my addiction or the peak addiction. So many other people drink the way I did. They don't commit the crimes that I did. And so I told him everything that I did. And he said, "Okay." I said, I want to turn myself in. He says, "Okay." Within a week after that, I started looking up lawyers, and I started like looking at what the process was going to be like. I get a call from the Securities and Exchange Commission on the telephone, and they said, "Is this Joseph?" "Yes." "This is so and so. We'd like to speak to you." And I felt relieved. And I was like, "Oh, um, so, every day I wake up, and I think of the people in ICU, like they wish they had my problem. They wish they could go to prison for X amount of time just to make it out of the hospital alive." So I was so I told the person on the line, the SEC, I was like, "Would it be okay if I give you guys a call back in a few days?" He goes, "Sure." I took down his name and number. I hired a lawyer. I went to see a few lawyers. I hired that lawyer. I said, that when I went to my lawyer's office, I was like, I was like in tears in the office. Like my wife couldn't believe what was going on. She couldn't believe what I did. I'm telling her everything that I did, and like, it was she was there with me. I was telling my lawyer, I was like, "Listen, I own what I did. I take full responsibility for what I did. This is what I did. This is how I did it. I don't want to give the government the runaround." I said, "Just please tell them that I want to fall on the sword. I there's this is," and that was May of 2021. So my lawyer said, "Okay, I'll call the SEC and let them know." And he said, "You can't go into the firm anymore that day. You have to walk away from the business." I had other open positions, other clients that I just had to go radio silent on. And like for 2, 3 days after that, I wasn't answering my phone. I couldn't talk to clients. So I started looking online for a job, and I went to work at Amazon at a warehouse on a forklift, stowing pallets from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I got a second job at the golf course, $15 an hour. I was a golf ranger. I was getting 1965 at an Amazon, and I was grateful for the work. I felt great for the first time in years. It's like just to get out of that greed of Wall Street, and just getting a transplant. Someone had to die for me to live, and being sober, and I felt great, and regardless of going to prison or anything, I was just so grateful for the work. My doctors at Columbia New York Presbyterian, they weren't happy with me working at Amazon on a forklift, because it was a stand up forklift, and it was. But I said no. I said I'm going to do it, and so that was May of 2021. In June of 2021, I created a website. I wanted to document everything that I was doing. I wanted to show the judge that I'm maximizing every day, that I'm creating a new track record, because I read a lot about post offense conduct, how important it is leading up to sentencing. And then I started studying federal judges like Benita Pearson. She said, "I expect the defendant to take their case as a full time job and to come into sentencing exhausted." That resonated with me early on, that it's not just about hiring a lawyer and just waiting for sentencing. And then two other prominent judges. They said, like, we only take 10% into account what the lawyer says. We know they're a paid mouthpiece for the defendant. It's what the defendant shows us. So that really resonated with me. And I realized that I have a lot more control over my case than what I thought. So in the same month of June of 2021, um, I call my lawyer one day and I'm like, his name is Nicholas. I said, Nicholas, I have things that I purchased with ill-gotten gains. I said, they don't belong to me. I said, they belong to the victims. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, bring it up to my office. I said, all right, I'll give me a couple of days. And um, Ian, I got everything. I mean, jewelry, watches. I brought up stacks of cash, gold ounce coins, silver kilo bars. I had 6 duffel bags, and 3 of them were like the big hockey duffel bags. He had to send his assistants down with dollies to come up. So we go up in the office, and he's like, Joe, I never seen anyone like this. I never seen anyone like you. He goes, someone else would have maybe give it to their loved ones. Or I said, Nicholas, listen, my possessions are not my identity. These do not belong to me. They belong to the victims. I said, and I want to come clean the right way. I want to try and right this wrong as much as possible. I know I can't completely right this wrong. I said, but I have control over this. And I said, I said, I have 2 judges, one in the courtroom and one upstairs. And I said, so I said, what are we going to do? So he goes, all right, let's make an assessment. So I was in his office that day for about 7 hours or so, all day. And we made a list of everything and like an assessed valuation. And he said, all right, the government will come pick it up. They had like this walk-in safe in the law firm. I left everything there. And then started speaking at AA. I remember the first time I spoke and opened my mouth and told about my transplant. And, I didn't realize, that was the beginning, the infancy stage of AA for me in 2021. The way I'm tied in now to it. So then it was different because like the first time I opened my mouth, I didn't realize how compelling my story was. I didn't know about how my transplant, me telling the story about how I was going to tell others in recovery. Like they say, you got to give it away to keep it. And so I started leading at meetings. I started speaking at meetings, speaking at detox clinics, and Father Jeff became my sponsor. He held me to, he held me accountable as well. And, you know, um, he was the one who brought me in to start speaking at detox centers. And then, so that was, that I still didn't get a plea deal until December of 2021. I wound up getting a plea deal in December of 2021, December 27th of 21. 1 count of securities fraud, 1 count of wire fraud, restitution 1.2 million, and I didn't disagree with anything. I signed it right away. The U.S. attorney had it back first week in January of 2022, and the early mitigation, I think, in my case, the way I came forward, I believe did help it because they did give me a -3 points because I had 25 points. And it was 22 minus the 3 points for acceptance of responsibility. And that on the sentencing guidelines is 41 to 51 months. So they had it back right away. And, I had a fiduciary responsibility as a broker. I didn't know, I didn't know what to expect. So I was, um, when I was studying, like, the prosecutor controls 80% of the courtroom and, judges only take a small percent what the lawyer says. Like, I didn't want to have any regret versus preparation. I wanted to leave it all out there. And if I would have got the 41 to 51 months, so be it. I mean, I believe in like justice. You do something wrong, you should pay for it. I don't, and So I pled guilty March 1st of 2022. My case was out of the Eastern District of New York, which is in Brooklyn. And I had my pre-sentence interview March 30th of 2022. Now, when I started studying about this process, about not only what the judges expect and, just I, I knew that the pre-sentence interview is the most important part of the journey. And my lawyer, even though he was great, he accepted a lot of the mitigation that I did. Like early on, I wrote a 4,000 word letter to the judge, and I said to him, my heart pushed the pen and like everything, because I wanted the judge, because I found out that these mitigation lawyers were only these capital offense, these capital lawyers that they were handling the death row inmates. They were the only ones implementing mitigation. I said, why isn't it used more? And my lawyer said, Joe, you don't need to do that and stuff. And I was like, no. I was like, I remember telling him, yes, I do. I was like, listen, I'm in the driver's seat. This is my case, and I want I want you to, implement all this mitigation that I'm doing. Like when I gave him the 4,000 word letter to the judge before my pre-sentence interview, I said, Nicholas, call the probation officer that's conducting my interview and tell them to kindly read this letter ahead of the pre-sentence interview, the pre-sentence investigation, and fully attach it to the pre-sentence report that gets created from the interview. Fully attach it. And he was like, Joe, I said, please just call him, because it was 3 days before the interview, and I wrote it, pen to paper, because mitigation is basically humanizing yourself to the judge, letting them know everything about you. Judges are human beings making human decisions about our lives, and judges know, no one's perfect. We're all flawed. No one's flawless. We all make mistakes, and the more they know about you, the better. Not just what the charges say on paper for me, right? Um, so when I was on my pre-sentence interview, I remember my lawyer saying, "Oh, it's only a 20-minute interview. They're going to go over background information, where you were born, your upbringing, who your siblings are. Would it be okay to call them?" And I understood it as something totally different. I was like, "No." I was like, "This is very important. I have one bite at the apple." One bite at the apple is in my Bloomberg Law published piece from 3 weeks ago, December 8th. A Bloomberg Law contributor. Can't believe it. But if you just Google Joe De Gregorio, Bloomberg Law, you could read about the one bite at the apple, the pre-sentence interview. And I was like, Nicholas, I have one bite at the apple here. I said, I'm indirectly speaking to the judge. Everything I say on the pre-sentence interview is a matter of record. The pre-sentence report that gets created from the interview, the judge relies heavily on, more so than the sentencing memorandum. I said, I respectfully disagree. This is not just a 20-minute interview. I said, I've been preparing for this all month. There's certain things that I want to, say to him and get off my chest. And so mine was on Zoom because the COVID protocols were still in place. So my lawyer was on one window, the probation officer started. And, I said, thank you so much for reading my letter to the judge before it, and thank you for fully attaching it to the report that gets created from the interview. So after he was done asking me the questions, where I was born, grow up, he said all that, what my lawyer said he was going to do. And then I wanted to take control of the floor. So I said to him, sir, do you mind, if I say some things, sure. You know, they think, he thought maybe I was going to put my foot in my mouth, but I didn't. I just want to address the victims, because the victims always come first. I have a pain in my stomach every single day right now sitting here with you, and it's never going to go away for the rest of your life. Even if you pay back restitution, it never goes away. When you create victims, it's a pain that you can't even put into words. And, you say to yourself, oh, what if someone did that to my father? Or what if someone did that to my uncle or whatever? So I was on my pre-sentence interview for 2 hours, and I just let everything, come out of my heart, just saying about how, putting the victims first. I identified with the victims. Then the remorse, the humility, the shame, the lessons learned, why I'll never be in another courtroom again, and then the plan going forward. And so I was on it for 2 hours. And midway through, my lawyer tried to interrupt me. He goes, "All right, Joseph, that's enough. They have enough from you." And I was like, "Wait, Nicholas, I'm not done." And I asked the officer, I was like, "Sir, you don't mind if I continue, right?" He was like, "No, no." He's like, "Go ahead, please." He goes, however, I have all the time." He goes, I was like, "Thank you." So, I just wanted, because when I studied the process of going through this, it was like, I mean, you know, lawyers are great at what they do, but there's certain things that, especially with sentencing mitigation and especially with the pre-sentence interview and implementing a lot of things that they don't teach you in the courtroom. Because to me, I think that the battle is won outside of the courtroom and not inside the courtroom. I mean, they're great at legalities and, case law, comparing your case to other cases. Yes, but the defendant has so much control over their outcome. And, I wanted them to know about, you know, how I felt deep to the core of me, and not only that, but who the core of me is. And um, 2 months before my pre-sentence interview, 2 months before I even pled guilty, I started paying restitution back. I started paying restitution back 9 months before sentencing. And I remember calling my lawyer, and I said, "Nicholas," I said, "I want to start sending you a check every month," because I had my bank accounts were closed. And I said, "I want you to earmark it for restitution." I said, "Keep it in escrow for me. Keep it in like a law firm escrow account." I said, "I don't have an account." I go, "I'll send you up like a money order or a check." I said, "I'm working at Amazon. I'm working at the golf course." And he said, "How much you sending?" I was like, I'm making like 3,500 a month. I said, "I'm going to send up like 4 or 500 a month." So he said, "No, Joseph, it's not 20, 30 grand. Don't worry about it." I was like, "No, no, no." I was like, "Please, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you, this is what I want to do." I said, "I want to start, I want to," I was like, "You don't think you don't think, the judge sees that the judge, they know how much I'm making. I'm making 19 and change at Amazon, 15 on the golf course as a golf ranger." I said, "I'm volunteering in the evening. I'm doing AA, doing 3 or 4 in persons a week, 3 or 4 Zooms. There were many days I was doing 2 meetings a day. Um, and then I would come home 9:30, exhausted, take a half hour to myself, and then I'd get on the computer and pass courses. And I just started dedicating myself to education, and I started just passing course after course." So my lawyer said, "No, just hold on to it." And that was January of 22, right after I signed my plea deal, actually. Sorry if I'm backing up. But so I said, "No, no, please take it, hold it." I said, "I'm going to send it to you every month." I was like, 4 or 500. Restitution's the most important thing to me. And so, so I'm documenting everything that I'm doing every single day. So from May of 2021, when I got the call from the SEC, I created a website. I was basically writing down everything that I was doing. I was voice texting it into my iPhone. Like if I was on the forklift in the Amazon warehouse and something came over me I wanted to write about, or put on, just talk about remorse, redemption, talk about the work night, anything I just wanted the judge to know like what I was doing every day leading up to sentencing, because that's extremely important post defense conduct. And I was sentenced September 14th of 2022. And, leading up to sentencing, when you prepare your sentencing memorandum, it was like a month before sentencing. I started studying things at night on the computer, like how side by side brain comparisons, like brain scans, the regular mind versus the alcoholic mind, how it affects the gray matter in our brain, the decision making, the rationale. Not to make an excuse for what I did. I take full ownership what I did, but I became this complete Jekyll and Hyde. I deviated from all the values I brought up with. I went down this bad path over a period of time, and I a few years before that, I just paid all my clients back the losses from the 2008 crash. So I certainly did not want to steal from them. Like it was just, yeah. When you're in the throes of your alcoholism, you know, there was nothing stopping me from continuing to drink myself to death. And so I just wanted my lawyer to put some of that into the memorandum, to put the website. I wrote like a paragraph of what I was doing, the restitution, how much that means to me, and how dedicated I am, because that's all right. So I remember that the sentencing got underway, and then my lawyer stood up like midway through and said, "Your Honor, I propose a year and a day for my client." Um, and the judge looked at the U.S. attorney and said, "Do you have a problem with that?" And they said, "No, Your Honor." And the judge says, "Neither do I." And I was sentenced to a year and a day.
Frontline Healing Foundation exists for the warriors among us, our military, first responders, and law enforcement who carry the weight of service long after the uniform comes off. For many of these warriors, the battles don't end at home. Post traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, and substance dependency can quietly take hold, and too often, the cost of real treatment becomes a barrier to getting help. That's where Frontline Healing Foundation steps in. They don't host retreats or offer quick fixes. They subsidize the cost of clinically proven treatment at vetted facilities so warriors could focus on healing, not finances. Because asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. If you believe the people run towards danger deserve a real path to recovery, I encourage you to learn more or get involved. Visit frontlinehealingfoundation.org to donate or share their mission. Healing is possible, and no warrior should have to fight alone. What caused you to steal in the first place? Were you trying to make up losses from that 2008 crisis when you started your business, or were you able to get on your footing and business was good and then something else happened along the way?
So after the 2008 crash, and after I settled in 2011, I had a 70% of my book was destroyed. I rebuilt the book back. I was actually doing okay for myself. I was working at a private equity firm, and we had all these pre-IPOs, Airbnb before it went public. We had Lyft before it went public, and Palantir before it went public. And that's the reason why I got out of retail and I went to work at this private equity firm. And I said, all right, whatever I have under management, I said, I'll bury this, put it in these companies that are going to come public over the next 5 years or so. And no, I got greedy. I stole from my clients, and I own it. Um, but I was making money still. I mean, it didn't make any sense for what I did, and anything that I was doing at the time didn't make sense. I mean, I was gambling. Okay. I mean, I had a private driver because I was always intoxicated that I could not drive. So, I couldn't hide it to the point. Like, when the owner of the firm sees you coming in with a driver and leaving, he's like, what's going on? Why can't you drive? And then when you can't put dress shoes on anymore, lying is very hard. And like saying the truth is very easy. And when you're running from guilt with a bottle in your hand, that's when like professionals turn into criminals.
What did your wife think when you broke this news? You probably just dropped a bomb on her one day. One day everything's good, and then the next day, it's even worse than just getting the transplant.
So the day I got a call from the SEC, the next day I called a few attorneys and I said, I want to come in and talk to you. And I told her in the car driving to Manhattan from New Jersey, and um, completely blew her mind. She was I destroyed. She was destroyed. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She didn't. She did not believe anything that I was saying. She couldn't believe what I did. Um, it was a lot of repairing to do with that as well. A lot of repairing because this is a destroy and rebuild process. The whole thing, victims' lives, people who loved you, people who expected great things from you, people who relied on you, they expect great things from you, and then you let everyone down. It just reminds me of that cascade effect of the stock chart of a stock going to zero. And now you have to slowly rebuild your credibility. Um, I mean, she's still with me to this day. She said if I ever do anything wrong again, she's leaving me. I mean, she's never going to put up with that again. Um, I mean, I was lying to her as well. Everything that I was doing, I was lying to everyone. And um, so, yeah.
You must have a great sense of remorse now, like when dealing with clients, because I'll interview a lot of people, and it's one thing to say you're sorry, but your actions kind of have to reflect that. So you probably have a great sense of when you're meeting with people that are facing sentencing or prison, whether they're actually sorry and conveying that to the judge or not. Because not everyone goes to the extent that you've gone to before prison. I know in my case, I got like a job a month before sentencing to give money from my paycheck to it. But I also had bad conduct after sentencing. I mean, after conviction, but before sentencing that played a part, and I got my bond revoked. But I was a little too little too late towards it. So it's interesting that you have that perspective, especially when dealing with your clients now.
Yeah. When I speak to someone, and thank you for sharing that. When I speak to someone, the first thing I want to do is see, if they're fully accountable, see if they're fully remorseful. Because I take their case as serious as mine. I work at it nonstop. Just like I worked on my case, I did 160 miles an hour to sentencing. I left nothing to chance, no regret versus preparation. I left it all out on the table. And I could tell when someone who's not genuinely remorseful, I could tell when people say, "Oh, well, I don't have to pay that back, after this," and and now I started working with a lot of law firms, and when the lawyer calls me, he says, "Joe, I got a client that I'd like for you to talk to." I say, "Sure." The first 60 to 90 minutes, I'll talk to them, and I want to see if they're holding themselves accountable. I want to see if there's pain in the core of them for what they did, and I don't want to have to make them realize what they've done. It should be in your sixth sense. It should be in your gut, and that should just come out of you. And I could tell if it's coming out of your pores or not. And I'm very, very selective with who I work with, and um, now consulting on over 400 cases, every single one more or less that I took on was someone who was devastated at what they did. And a lot of them, believe it or not, 60, 70%, there there's some sort of addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol. And then it spirals because they can't cope with leading up to sentencing. And I get calls at 2 in the morning. I get up from bed, I go sit inside, I go talk to them. Whether they're saying, I had a client a few months ago call me and say, Joe, I just, over the weekend, my brother had to come over and take the guns out of the house, and I'm, so there's a lot that it's getting them mentally strong, because the defendant with a weak mind that is not mentally strong for sentencing, they have the worst outcomes. And the ones who are very strong, they have the better outcomes, because to everyone that I consult, this is the worst thing that happened to them in their life. 95% of them. With me, it's the second thing going to prison, because mine was the transplant and making it out of there alive. So I wake up every day with endless gratitude. Every day I open my eyes, I always think about the people in ICU who didn't make it out of there. They wish they could go to prison for 41 to 51 months. I was so grateful for the work. I recently put together a whole structured mitigation plan for an individual. It was just to get started too. It was like a 12 it was 12 things that I wanted him to do, and he called me a few days later. He says, "It's a little too much. I'll just start doing 3 of them." And I was like, "You know what? Just, I think, maybe it's better off that you and I don't work together. Like, if and you can sense it. It's very, very, it's just, it's so, believe it or not, not a lot of people value their freedom. A lot of people value their freedom differently. Like everyone automatically thinks I'm just going to hire the best attorney and that's it. And they just wait for sentencing. I don't know what they do, hang out or go out. They don't work. I tell them, you got to create a new track record. You got to work. It's very important. If there's victims, do you identify with the victims? Do they keep you up at night? I mean, like, I'm going to be. It doesn't matter even when I pay them back in full. I pay 20% a month of gross, and I never miss a payment. I put more. In fact, I always pay more than what I'm supposed to, and the redemption is a lifelong commitment. It doesn't end when you're done with your sentence. It doesn't end at restitution. It doesn't end when you're off supervised release. Every day I wake up, I want to be better than the day before and the day before that. Like, someone had to die so I can live. I mean, I'm so grateful to be sitting here with you today and talking to you, because, then I surrendered to prison November 17th of 2022. And, I started studying about how to get out of prison as quickly as possible. I said, what does the Bureau of Prisons really look at? What do they really, really expect from me? And the biggest thing to the Bureau of Prisons is having a good reentry plan, is having a good release plan. Because every cynical stakeholder, a case manager in prison, the unit manager, which is the case manager's boss, a judge, how do you separate yourself from everyone else that comes in the courtroom? How do you separate yourself from everyone else in the prison? And they have the recidivism rate etched in the front of their mind of 67%. I think the federal is 53%, 60 plus for state. But still, they figure like every 10 guys that come in front of them, 5 or 6 is going to reoffend. And it's my job to make them understand, like, I'm part of the 33%. I'm part of that 40%. Like, I'm never going to be in another courtroom again. But they don't know that. And just like the judge only has 2 documents, the pre-sentence report and the sentencing memorandum. And they only see us twice, once when we plead guilty and once when we're sentenced. And they when a judge looks at you in the courtroom like they're studying body language, I think they're experts at body language. I think when the judge looked at me and, when they, and I read books about that as well. I wanted, nonverbal cues. A lot of it's like everything I wanted to know, everything about the process. But then when I was released, excuse me, when I got to prison around the 30-day mark, we have that team meeting where we meet the case manager for the first time. And it's a very important meeting. The case manager holds all the cards on us getting out early, and they're not the nicest person. They work in a prison all day. They're very cynical. A lot of guys are busting their chops all the time saying, hey, I'm eligible to go home. How come I'm not home? And, what's going on here? I'm supposed to be at the halfway house already. So I already understood that they're overloaded with work. They're getting inundated constantly. They work in a prison all day. They're around people with a criminogenic mindset, and I'm going to be viewed the same. So when I went into my first team meeting, the guys were telling me, my lawyer had 2 guys in FMC Devons, and they were waiting for me. So, they said, oh, you have Miss So-and-so. She's the toughest case manager in the prison. She's not going to do anything for you. I didn't listen to the noise because, that expression, misery loves company. It's very true in prison. Like, guys, they're miserable, so they want you to be miserable kind of. So I was just like, all right, if she doesn't let me go, she doesn't let me go. What do you want from me? So she said, she went over my Spark 13, my pattern score, because those surveys, when we surrender to prison, those surveys we take on the computer are very, very important. It's like these 3 or 4 quizzes that they want to see if you have a criminogenic mindset. And I already knew going in, day one, you have to take those surveys right away. That's how your first step back credits start kicking in. That's how I get the earn time credits. So, as soon as I surrendered, I got my 12 cop out forms. I put in for every class, and, I went to the computer, uploaded my contact list, and then I completed the surveys. And, I remember one of the questions was, if you're walking out of a supermarket one day and you see a bag of money on the floor, you got to A, turn it all in, B, keep some if you're behind on bills. Like, just, of course, I'm going to turn it all in. So as soon as I completed those surveys, um, then I sought out, like, in my unit, like, who knows all about the programs that's going on. And I wanted to find out, like, the guy who's, programming the most and what was available. There wasn't a lot going on because of COVID. There's even less going on now because of all the staff shortages and everything. So, if you have your health, um, prison is just boredom and missing your family. But I had a lot of health issues, and I got terribly sick in prison. Like when I surrendered November 17th, they put me they put me in the shoe. After I went through R&D, they walked me into the shoe because of the COVID protocols was still in place. And my doctors at New York Presbyterian got in touch with FMC Devons 2 weeks before my surrender. And they say, he's very unstable. I was still healing. I still had, you know, um, everything was, I was really fragile. And so, they're like, he just had a liver transplant. He takes his anti-rejection meds twice a day. These are the milligrams. He takes his immunosuppressants twice a day. These are his, yeah, okay, we got it, this and that. So when I surrendered with my medications, right? And they threw it out. They're like, we give you generics here and everything. But I had my release plan in a big yellow envelope. I wrote in the front of it legal docs with a black Sharpie so they didn't throw it away. And I had my contact list in there. I had some medical paperwork in there. And they walked me to the shoe. So I knew I was going into solitary. My lawyer told me, he says, you got to get quarantined for 7-8 days. I was like, no problem. I was just in a hospital for 4 months, Ian. I mean, so I'm going to lay there. I told the guard, just give me the two biggest books. He gave me Alexander Hamilton biography. Great book. It was 748 pages. How they put his mom in the sand pits in the jail in St. Croix, and he escaped it. So it was a pretty interesting book. And Maximum Achievement by Brian Tracy. Unbelievable book.
You're lucky they gave you books.
I know. I found out later that I was lucky.
Some guards don't do that.
No. So I didn't get let out like 1 hour a day. They just closed the door for the 7 days from November 17th until Thanksgiving. The shower didn't work. Of course it's dirty, right? I'm drinking water from the sink. I knew I was going to get sick, and they didn't give me my medicine the 17th, the 18th, the 19th. And now here I am taking them twice a day. And every time I hear the keys and the guard coming down the tier into the shoe, every time he entered the shoe, I would wait. You got to wait till, because the doors are thick. I'm the only one in there. It's small. I love the setup, by the way. You showed me upstairs about
the prison cell, yeah.
Yeah. And, when he got close to my door, I started banging on the door. I said, "Hey, I just self-surrendered. Can you please get me my medicine? I had a liver transplant. I had a full liver transplant. I have to take this, twice a day." I said, "It's 3 days now. I didn't get it." The first guard says, "I'm not a doctor." I remember the next guard, he says, "You should have thought of that before coming in here." And I knew this. Listen, I did this to myself. I deserve everything I get, right? I mean, I put myself there. So finally on day 4, a female guard intervened and said, she put her ear to the door, and I heard her saying, "What? Oh, I'm going to get your medicine. Okay, let me find out everything." And so that was November 21st. And then I already started feeling like all these abdomen pains on the second, third day. I started feeling really, really not right. I knew something was going on. I knew something was going to happen. And so when they released me from the SHU, I went to general population. I was in H unit. There's about 1,200 guys, 1,100 guys in Devons, and each building's like 200. There's 4 buildings on general population, so there's like 800, and there's like 2 or 300 in the hospital wing. Really bad shape, and how they were treating those old timers is so. Uh, they started taking blood from me. They started calling me up to the hospital wing, and I started walking up the compound after I was let out. So November 27th, they took blood. December 1st, they took blood. The 5th, they took blood. And I remember kind of asking the nurse, do you know my results? And they're like, no, we can't tell you anything. We can't tell you the results. So then, I asked them again. I was like, please, can you tell me the results? They were like, if you ask us again, they were going to write me up or something. I was like, all right, there's none I can do. And so all of a sudden, December 12th of 2022, I'm laying in my bunk reading a book. And the guard comes over and he says, you have to go outside the lieutenant's office, get your jacket. And I'm like, why? I didn't do anything wrong. You get called into the lieutenant's office. You think, so they said they call it a bus stop at Devon's. It's like this little bench outside the lieutenant's office. They call it a bus stop. So he was like, go to the bus stop. I'm like, what are you talking about? We're in a prison. Where's the bus? He's like, no, it's the bench outside of the lieutenant's office. So I get my jacket. I'm sitting out there, and this was like 4:30. It was after the 4 o'clock count, and the 2 guards come out and they say, come with me. And they start bringing me down to the bowels of Devon's, and we start walking down the big, and I'm like, oh, this is where I came in from when I surrendered. I'm like, why am I going like to R&D? So we get to R&D, and he's like, take off your clothes. I put another uniform on. They had another name. They shackled me with the waist, wrists, feet, and they were like, they put me in a van. I'm like, can you tell me what's going on? Where are we going? So he's like, the doctor's saying you're having like liver rejection or something. We're taking you down to the hospital, Beth Israel in Boston. I said, okay. And I'm feeling all these pains in my abdomen. I'm like, I knew something wasn't right. Just missing a few days when you have a transplant, it's like I have to take them for the rest of my life. I take them twice a day and everything. So I get to the hospital. They chain me to the bed, ankle chained, one arm. I had 2 guards sitting by my side 24 hours a day in 8-hour shifts. 2 new guards came in, and as soon as I got there, the doctors, they did a biopsy. They said, you're having severe liver rejection. They started treating me with IV steroids, and it didn't stop. So they did another biopsy on December 16th. So I was like 4 or 5 days there. When I got there, it was December 12th. So then they started treating me with what was called ATG, which I found out later is this rabbit protein. It's basically to stop your immune system so your body stops attacking the liver. Because your body, when you have liver rejection, it's your body realizing you have a foreign object, you have something foreign in your body, and it starts attacking it. And so they have to just completely shut down your immune system. And it wipes out your T cells. It's not good. All right. I mean, if you have no T cells, you're very prone to cancer. So now I'm like, hey, can I call my wife or anything? Like, you can't call anybody. They didn't even let me get up to go take a shower. Right. This was like a weekend. It was like December 19th. The nurse said, you got to let him walk around, let him walk the floor or something like that. So, yeah, I wasn't talking to the guards, and I was just laying there. And so they let me walk around December 19th. I have these thick ankle chains on, and I'm walking with this treatment that they're giving me, this intravenous, and I have the machine, and I'm like, everyone's looking at me because I'm making this sound, and I'm walking by every room, and everyone's like this, because they hear the chains coming. It was like, I don't know, like I was like, can you take the ankle chains off so I can, because they were really, really big chains. So he goes, all right, that's enough walking. I was like, listen, can I take a shower? I was like, I didn't take a shower for 7 days. 7 days when I surrendered and take a shower. Now another time I didn't take a shower in 7 days. I'm like, I just want to take a shower. So he's like, leave the door open. You're leaving the ankle chains on. And I remember asking the nurse, I was like, can you please let my wife know where I am? And she was like, I'm sorry, sir. I'm like, I can't do anything for you. And I was like, all right. I wrote them such a letter for saving my life, those nurses and doctors, because they were unbelievable. And um, they hung it up in the kitchen, and I walked over. They let me walk over and see it. I was like, I can't thank you guys enough for everything that you've done. And so December 29th, they drive me back to the prison 3 years ago today. So this is why
It's
this date,
symbolic.
yeah. Yeah, December 29th, this is 2025, December 29th, 2022. It was a snowstorm up in Devon. Boston, it wasn't snowing. It's like a 2.5 hour ride. And they were driving fast. Like I remember telling them, can you slow down? Because they didn't even seatbelt me and I was shackled and I was sliding everywhere and I'm in so much pain. And I'm like, can you please slow down? And they're like, if you tell us that again, I was the only one in the van. I remember when they came to pick me up when I was getting discharged from the hospital, December 29th, it was like at 10 p.m. The guards that were watching me, there was like a private contractor. They weren't from Devon's, but they had a book with them. So whoever came into my hospital room, every nurse, every time the cleaning lady came on, every time I had a meal or anything, they had to log into the book and they would give it to the lieutenant at Devon's, like to make sure. So my wife found out where I was. My doctors in New York found out where I was. And they told my wife. So now my wife called the hospital and said, my husband's up there. What's going on with him? And this is, you know, my wife is the hero of the story, right? I mean, I'm just a guy that stayed alive long enough to make it up to her. But what you put your family through, what I put my wife through, and her, the way she was there for me every day during the transplant, and then she comes out of that, and then I have to tell her about what I did, and then she goes through the whole case. Like the worst part of the journey is going through your case. Like prison's the easy part. Going through the process of all the unknowns is the hard part. And if you have your health, prison's the easy part. If you don't, I didn't have a medical release form. I didn't have a HIPAA form on file. This is how I learned now. Every person that I consult with that has health issues, I say, please get a medical release form, get a power of attorney, get a HIPAA form signed, bring it over to the records department, to the prison when you surrender. Make sure you get a copy of it, have it on file with the doctor at the prison. And so if anything happens to you, when your loved one calls the prison, they have to tell you what's going on. If you don't have those three things on file, they don't tell you anything unless you're dead, right? And then I created an emergency contact with one of the guys in my unit. I said, listen, if anything happens like that again, where they sent me out of the prison, I had to go to the hospital, call your wife and tell your wife to call my wife. So that was a good thing for anyone to do as well. Any emergency, even if you get sent to the SHU, you get a disciplinary infraction or something, it's always good to have an emergency contact to let your loved ones know. Because again, it's worse on them, So December 29th, they put me back in the SHU until January 5th. Again, they didn't give me my medicine the 30th, the 31st. And then finally, I said to the guard, I was like, give me a cop out form because I'm filing an administrative remedy. I said, I got to file. I got to make this, formal BP8, BP9. I was like, you guys, I just got out of the hospital for liver rejection. And, I just want my medicine. I was like, you can leave me in here as long as you want. Just give me my medicine. because I remember telling the guard, I was like, "This is a federal medical center." I was like, "How is this a medical center?" I was like, "I can't even get my medicine." He goes, "Listen, we're gonna get it for you." I was like, "No, I don't think you understand. I got to take it twice a day." And when I went to the hospital, they put me on all different medications. So when I went back to Devon's December 29th, I wasn't taking those same medications. I was taking completely different ones, different milligrams, potency. I was on 4 different things because the first time he brings them to me on New Year's Eve, they were the old ones. I was like, "No, he opens the slot, he gives it to you." I'm like, "Sir, these are cyclobenzaprine. Cyclosporin." I was like, "I'm taking tacrolimus now. I'm taking mycophenolate." I'm like 3, and I had them all memorized in my head because when I got discharged from the hospital, I wanted a printout, and they didn't even make me have a printout. So I made sure I memorized exactly what I was taking so I can tell them because they don't care. Um, and again, I put myself there. I did this to myself, so it wasn't like something, But you say to yourself, okay, medical center. It, it wasn't even a veterinarian clinic. Like, a veterinarian clinic was better than FMC Devon's. So then when I got in January 5th, when I went back to general population, they let me out of the shoe. I told my case manager, I said, "You guys are going to kill me in here." I was like, "I don't know, I'm a minimum security guy. I got a year and a day, but it is going to be like a death sentence." I was like, "Why can't you guys just get my medicine right?" Because I had to go to pill call, and they were still giving me my old medication at pill call, and I had to tell the nurse then. And I remember telling her, like, "These are the old medications." I was like, "I'm on this, and this now." And she's like, "Well, take these. It's still anti-rejection meds. It's still immunosuppressants." I was like, "No." I was like, "I don't think." She goes, "Well, I don't have them. You got to come back tomorrow." So now I'm missing another day. So, like, every day, and then when I went back to my unit January 5th, everyone's sick. Who's got pink eye? Who's got COVID? They don't want to go to sick call because they got to get put in the shoe, right, for quarantine. So I see, like, all right, this guy is touching the computer. I'm not going to that computer, the phone, because now my immune system is zero. I have no immune system, because they had to stop the rejection. They had to shut down your immune system. And now, so you're thinking about all these things and you have like such heightened awareness, and, you're saying, everyone's sick around me and all this stuff. And so you can't avoid it. There's no way you can avoid it. Um, So I started pleading my case to my case manager, and I was like, "I want to go to home confinement." And I said, "You see my reentry plan? You see the release plan? I'm building it. I'm writing the book reports. I'm writing monthly report cards." She goes, "De Gregorio, I've never seen anything like this release plan in 22 years working in the prison." She said, "I showed the unit manager it. I showed the head lieutenant your release plan as well. We were all thoroughly impressed by it. I want to thank you for coming in here as prepared as you were." I was like, "Listen, I'm never going to be in another courtroom again. I just want you to know if you sign off on my release, you'll, your name is going to be in good standing. I'll never do anything to jeopardize, like, so she was extremely tough. But she got the release process going, and then she explained to me how it works. Case manager has to sign off on it. The unit manager has to sign off. Then the head lieutenant has to sign off to make sure you don't have any disciplinary infractions. And then it goes to the associate wardens. They all each individually have to sign off. And, I'm not going to meet them. So having the release plan scanned into my central file is a big deal because they say, "Okay, wow, okay, this is different. This guy has a plan in place. This is good." You know, you eliminate the recidivism rate out of their head because it's very important to do that. You have so many cynical stakeholders that hold sway over your freedom that you're not going to meet. And then the warden has to sign off on it, and it doesn't end there. Once the warden signs off on your release, my file leaves the prison and it goes to the residential reentry center, and where we are in the Northeast, that's a Philadelphia. That Philadelphia office handles every male and female coming out of federal prison. They're the ones who get in touch with the halfway house. They get in touch with your future probation officer, and they do the home inspection. They make all the arrangements. So having that release plan in my central file was very detrimental for me getting out after serving a little over 25% of my time, right? I got out March 21st of 2023. I surrendered November 17th of 2022. I got admitted to the outside hospital again in February 5th to the 10th because I had acute kidney injury because I had, you know, I was going to the bathroom the whole month of January. I couldn't stop. And I was completely dehydrated no matter how many, you're allowed to buy one case of water. I remember someone else, telling someone else, buy a case of water for me, I'll buy whatever you need for $12. And, I just was trying to hydrate as much as possible. But because of the medication switch and the rejection of all what I had to, so I couldn't stop going to the bathroom. That caused acute kidney injury, which, I left there having stage 3 chronic kidney disease, which I have now. And so when I went to home confinement, I I had to drive to Newark to the halfway house. I gave that case manager my release plan as well. I pitched it the same way. I pitched the release plan like it was a Wall Street IPO, like it was a prospectus. I said, look, before surrendering, I studied the importance of having a viable release plan. I know how important it is to the BOP, but it's even more so important to me. I'm going to be 100% compliant. I'm going to maximize the time, be as productive as possible. I'm not going to inundate you. I said, I'll give you a progress report every week. I told the halfway house case manager, because I had to put my ankle bracelet on and I got sent home the same day. I was there for 4 or 5 hours.
Wow, lucky you. I had to wait like almost a month to get on home confinement.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of people. I mean, everything's so different now with the new laws and pushing people home, but before it was just a mess.
I feel like I'm doing too much talking. Continue.
No, you're doing great. The audience loves when the guest talks and
Really?
just tells the story. So you go on home confinement from there, and how long are you on the bracelet for before you're completely done? You max out.
March 21st of 23 till July 10th of 23. And then I called the probation officer right away, let him know I just got the bracelet off. He wanted me to meet him the following week at Newark Courthouse. And I brought the release plan with me there again.
You gave him one too?
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell all my clients, this release plan, you're going to, I create it for them. It's usually 20 to 25 pages. And then they grow it in prison and they continue to expand on it, whether on home confinement or the halfway house. And you continually grow it until you're off supervised release. Because I feel like it gave me a high degree of liberty and freedom on home confinement. Every time I emailed the case manager at the halfway house and said, I want to go for a walk, I want to go to the supermarket with my wife, or they just didn't let me go to anyone's house. I couldn't go to anyone's house unless they did a home inspection. So like for Easter, I couldn't go to the family's house for Easter. I wasn't going to have a family member, my wife's aunt, going to have a home inspection because I had to come there for Easter. So, and then, I continually build, and I'm still on supervised release now. I get off July 10th of 2026.
So they gave you how long?
3 years.
Oh, 3 years. Okay, so 2023.
Yeah.
And how does supervisor release work with your line of work? Because you're dealing with felons or people that are about to become felons, and everything like that.
So when I came home, I was volunteering with Michael Santos at Prison Professors during my case. I created this course with him that got distributed into prisons. He's a great guy, Michael Santos, and I learned a lot from him. And he offered me a job. He says, when you come home, you got to consult. We have people for you to consult. They saw how hard I worked on my case. I was working at it nonstop. I was sleeping for maybe every 20 hours, my eyes were up. It was working 2 jobs, volunteering in the evening, soup kitchen, homeless shelter, 3 or 4 in-persons a week, 3 or 4 Zooms, taking courses at night. They said, just share everything, and help. So when I went to meet my probation officer, I gave him the letter from Michael, and I was like, this is what I'm going to be doing. He approved it because he said, it's not like you're hanging out on a corner with known felons. He says, you're just sharing your story and helping people through the process. So they approved it from day one. And then when I started doing this on my own, um, they approved it, because you have to get everything approved. Because as soon as I came home, someone from Wall Street introduced me to Columbia University Business School, Justice Through Code. It's for formerly incarcerated people. And I never coded before. I mean, I traded on the Bloomberg terminal for 20 years. I didn't know that I was tech proficient, proficient with technology. And, a guy from Wall Street, this guy, he says, call him. He goes, the guy that runs the program, he actually did 17 years in Sing Sing. And, he does very well for himself now with software engineering. So I said, all right, I called him. Great guy, good guy, Dario. And anyone listening, look out. You could reach out to them. It's a fully funded, um, but I had to pass the onboarding process. And once I passed, it was uh, it was 20 weeks. It was 5 months. So the cohort that I was in, we won the capstone project, and so our team came in first place, and it was an ATS system. Bypassing the ATS system, when we submit a resume, and as we're felons, how do we bypass the system so we can get into somebody in front of someone to get a job? And so when I graduated from that Columbia University Business School, they gave me a lifetime membership to Coursera. Now, Coursera is like $100 a month, but you can take any courses you want. So when Dario said, you have a lifetime membership to Coursera, I said, really? He says, yeah. So I dove into education. I started taking 3 or 4 courses at a time. I have my AI engineering, machine learning from IBM, Microsoft. I have 80 certifications and specializations. They're all listed on my LinkedIn. I all passed them from Coursera. I was waking up at 4 in the morning, studying from 4 to 8, then started consulting. Then from like 1 to 5, I would do another class. Then from like 10 to 2, I would do another class. I was taking 3 classes at a time, and I wanted to take all ones for mitigation. Like how can I do something completely different that no one's doing in this space? Because I know there's a lot of prison consultants out there, and a lot of them do a great job. I mean, I was working for the biggest one in the field. But I wanted to, do something my way, completely different, something that they weren't doing. So I wanted to incorporate, like when I passed the University of Pennsylvania, the compliance rebuild. I looked at the 7 DOJ, the pillars of compliance that the DOJ holds. Sony and Apple, they hold these big Fortune 500 companies account to the 7 pillars of compliance. So I said, what if I apply this to the human being? And I started applying it to human cases, and I started having outcomes. 93% sentence reduction. My client had a 168-month guideline sentence. He was sentenced to a year and a day. I applied the compliance rebuild. I applied the same restitution framework, the same personal backstory attached to the PSR. We did a lot more mitigation. Basically, every single certification we applied to this case. And it's a lot of work, but I dedicated myself these last, even when I was going through my case, so 4 years was all dedicated to education, because upskilling and redeveloping ourselves is like the most important thing. Like, even if you're not formally incarcerated, with the technology and the age we're going with AI now and everything, and machine learning, and so I passed Google predictive analytics, the advanced, so now I can go over 10 years of sentencing history of a judge. I wanted to, so every time, like, with, it's a custom tailored suit. Like, every client that comes to me, it's, even though it might be the same charge, or wire fraud, or securities fraud, or bank fraud, money, whatever it is, it's a custom tailored suit to them. And then from Columbia University Business School, I went into Defy Ventures. Great organization for formerly incarcerated people. There's a great guy out there, Kyle, who brought me in because I was going to continue with Columbia University Business School. But I found out about Defy through someone in Columbia University Business. They said, Joe, we know you want to start, do this on your own and continue to help people going through the process. And, you should go into this entrepreneurial tech boot camp called Defy Ventures. So I reached out to them and, I had a few Zooms with this person. And I said, all right, I said, I definitely want to do it. So that was a 17-week entrepreneurial boot camp. Then I went into the pre-accelerator with them, and now I'm in the accelerator program. I've been in it for a year and a half. And when I pitched my company, JN Advisor, it came in first place on pitch night. And they have a lot of great tech entrepreneurs like volunteering. Roy Bahat was on there, he's a big guy with Bloomberg, big tech guy. And these guys volunteer and, they take you under your wing, they mentor you and everything. So, I'm very fortunate to find, I didn't know all these organizations were out there for people who were formerly incarcerated, the way they help, the way, if people look them up, like I would tell anyone to look up Columbia University Business School, Justice Through Code, and look up Dario. You connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll direct you. Even with Defy Ventures, they, the hardest thing I think is finding a job. So I wanted to start my own company and I wanted to do this the right way. I wanted to help as many people out as possible and their families. And I started just with white collar, but now I do other federal cases, you know, but it's the education I'm still involved with. I'm still learning a lot. October of this year, I was just on the American Bar Association podcast called the Just Pod, and the American Bar Association is not going to have anyone on, especially an ex felon, right? The only people that are on are like prosecutors, judges, U.S. attorneys, and top lawyers. So they reached out to me on LinkedIn. They said, we think you'd be an interesting guest. And I went on it. That was the first podcast I ever did. And I was really nervous because I'm like, all right, the guy who runs this, he's like a former U.S. attorney, and now he's a lawyer, and he's the chair of the white collar for the Bar Association. But no, it was great. They made it very easy for me, just to, like you, just relax, sit here and talk. So then from there, business. I did some with Business Insider. They reached out, and then a few weeks ago, Bloomberg Law just published my piece, how to get a judge to reduce your client to how to get a white collar sentence reduced by the judge. Like if anyone just looks up Bloomberg Law, Joseph De Gregorio, it'll come up. How to get a judge to reduce your client's white collar sentence. And I put the 14-year case in there, how we got this guy that had a 168-month guideline sentence reduced to a year and a day. No cooperation agreement, just like me. I had a 75% reduction in sentence with no cooperation agreement, still owing, restitution. He was the same way. And then I put in there, because I consulted with the Matt Boyer case, the bookie in the Shohei Ohtani case. I helped him with his pre-sentence interview. While I was working with that former company, they wanted me to prepare, because I do a lot with pre-sentence interview preparation, not to rehearse them or coach them, but just to like realize the magnitude of what they've done, to identify with the victims, because very easy to me. For me, it was natural, like the remorse, the pain, the core in the middle of me, that pain's never going to go away for the rest of my life. So when I see someone like, and he was remorseful, man, like he was a good person. Like he didn't, so I prepared him for his pre-sentence interview. He had a great outcome. I believe the government wanted like 4 or 5 years. He got a year and a day as well. And then I started helping a lot of people with early release. Like I just had someone come home after 4 months of a 20-month sentence, a 20% served on in the federals. Like it's like unheard of. No one ever, even the lawyer left a recommendation on my LinkedIn profile. I didn't even know he left a recommendation. Like you get an alert. Like I'm only on LinkedIn, by the way. I'm
which
not
we
on.
got to work on.
Yeah, I'm never. Yeah,
We
I
got to
know.
change that for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your help. If you could, so I'm only on LinkedIn. So the lawyer left a recommendation because I worked on my first compassionate release. I got someone who was serving a life sentence out after 27 years. So he's out now. He's in a Bronx halfway house. And they didn't want to let him go, even though he got a compassionate release out of the Eastern District of New York. The penitentiary that he was in California, the warden didn't want to let him out. So the lawyer was having trouble with this. He says, "Do you think you could do something about this?" So I got some legislative contacts that I had involved with the picture, and I started a very very heavy advocacy campaign for the compassionate release. So he was supposed to be in the Bronx halfway house by August 15th of this year, and we got him there a week later. But he's still in the Bronx halfway house now, and it was very difficult, with the BOP not wanting to move him. Because then when he moved to Victorville Penitentiary, he was on lockdown because something happened. I believe a stabbing happened. So they not he didn't have no disciplinary infractions. And that's why I took on that case. He was serving a life sentence with no disciplinary infractions, 27 years in. GPA, he had a 4.0 GPA. He saved two inmates' lives. He was a very very high profile inmate. So he's out, and then he wrote in the same recommendation. This lawyer's name is Richard Levitt. He's in New York. He's a great lawyer. I do work with him, and he left that 20-month out in 4 months. He said, I've never heard of anything like this. Like, people don't realize how much sway the case manager has over our freedom, and they can, with the swipe of a pen, push us out and get us out. But you have to climb to the top of the totem pole, and you have to prove worthy of why you're worthy to go home and how different you are. And I use the purple cow theory because it's so true. If I'm driving down a farm road and I see 200 cow, one's purple, my eyes are automatically going to gravitate to that purple cow. And that's how we have to be in prison. That's how we have to be in the courtroom at sentencing with the judge. That's how we have to be with the case manager in the halfway house and the probation officer. So, there's many stages of the journey, and, all of the stakeholders are very cynical, and they think that, we're going to be back or reoffend, but they don't know it unless you really prove it. So I was emailing my probation officer every 90 days, like what I did over the last 90 days, all the classes that I was taking, Columbia University, then going into Defy, then passing all my courses on Coursera. I passed MIT, Yale, University of Michigan, Google, Microsoft, PR. I passed my associate for public relations because of the dreaded DOJ press release. That's another thing I wanted to add to mitigation that no other firm is doing, because, when we plead guilty and you have that DOJ press release, now that digital footprint is there forever. And I had many instances where clients tell me, my kid is being bullied at school now, because, that press release, right? They're who's having, that press release is very heavy. I had it, in March of 2022. You Google my name, you see, and so I wanted to have a PR wing to drown out as much as possible with good data, because we're moving, everything with judges and everything is just factual data. It's not just asking for leniency and mercy. You have to separate yourself from everyone, but there's things that you can do to, like, now I'm starting to see, like, my press release, my DOJ press release getting suppressed. Like, it's getting more suppressed and more suppressed, just like yours. I'm sure you have so many different, if you Google your name, I'm sure your case doesn't come up right away. It might be on page 2 or 3 by now.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
all
know.
social media. It's my website. It's everything. It's really incredible. That's the power in sharing your story, even the guests, because our SEO is good with the show. When I put the guest name, the interview will come up now before the news article. So they get to share their story, and that's what people click on when they search their name. So that's really
Wow.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, because that was a big deal. And then another big deal was the restitution amount. Like there was a lot of discrepancies with cases that I saw, actual loss versus intended loss. So I passed my forensic accounting. That was the advanced forensic accounting I passed, University of Virginia. That was very, because everything that I passed was to provide my client, the most solid ironclad mitigation case that they can get the maximum sentence reduction and serve the most minimum amount of time. You know, the lawyers don't know about they never, a lot of them, or I should say, they don't challenge the amount. They don't know how to, because they're going to have to hire an outside forensic accounting. They're going to have to pay it, so forth and so on. But I do all that for my clients, if I have to. And now you have, with this new administration in May of this year, a whole completely 10 DOJ focus areas of what they're going at now. I mean, white collar cases are dropped by the wayside. There's about 3,600 a year now. It used to be over 10,000 a year. Now healthcare fraud is number one. Crypto fraud is on the list. Trade, with the sanctions a lot. So a lot of it is, but there hasn't been now any case that I can't put together an ironclad mitigation. Like I have to assess it, I have to digest it, I have to see of what could be. Like I don't just take on any case. I want to help whoever I can that owns what they did. Like, mostly everyone that I work with, they're fully remorseful, and you know greed takes over a lot. I mean, I got taken over by greed. I mean, it was, it was just, that's why it was just so great to work at Amazon, 1960, just to get
It's
away from that
humbling.
greed.
Yeah, it's
Very
humbling.
humbling. And in fact, that's what the judge said to me at sentencing. I see you ate your humble pie, De Gregorio, she said to me at sentencing, because I was working at Amazon and working at the golf course, getting 15 an hour. And, when, when you understand, like, you, you don't even need to hire anyone like me. Yes, some, you want me to hire, I will definitely help you get the best outcome. But it's really all education. It's really all everything that I did. I started studying mitigation. I started studying capital defense attorneys, then started studying judges. Then I started studying U.S. attorneys. And then I started studying case managers. And then I started studying, and then, so there's so much information at your fingertips nowadays to not do everything you can. Leave it all out there for your own case. Like, um, don't just leave it up to your lawyer, because mostly everyone that goes through this process does that. They just leave it up to their lawyer. The lawyers, 95% of the lawyers, I've read over 1,000 sentencing memorandums now. 95% of them are below average. And I tell them, stop citing case law, the comparison, start implementing some compliance mitigation in there. Start adding this to the sentencing memorandum to show the judge that they've rebuilt things that they've destroyed, because they want to see, like, do you really recognize the harm that you've caused? Have you rebuilt something you destroyed? Are you going to be in another courtroom again? And, there was, a professor at Indiana, when my Bloomberg Law piece came out 3 weeks ago from today. Someone he was a mitigation lawyer. Now he's a professor at Indiana University. He reposted it and said, when this guy said, when I started talking, his name is Todd Hall. He said, when I started talking about how lawyers don't implement mitigation back in 2012, I never thought the compliance rebuild, the way Joseph De Gregorio, this Bloomberg Law piece, I'm glad I clicked on this. I'm glad I did, because I just learned something in 14 years I've never actually thought about, of to apply a compliance rebuild based off the 7 DOJ pillars of compliance. And now I started talking to firms, and I started talking to companies about identifying the high performance guy who's wrapped up in a $5,000 suit like I was, who's the biggest liability and the biggest risk, and to prevent something like me happening, because you can see, you can spot when someone's, um, whether they're using or whether greed is getting control of them. You can spot their performance before the investigation happens, before the DOJ or the government says, we got to investigate, we're auditing you. You have to audit your employees and to see, who's under the pressure, who's, because there's ways now that you could, the way you were mentioning to me earlier before we were talking, about when we got started, you know, I was a liability wrapped in a suit. I was functioning. I was a high functioning performer until I wasn't. Until I couldn't put on dress shoes anymore. Until I couldn't hide it anymore. I was completely yellow and I needed a liver transplant, but I was too late. So, I'm starting to, speak about compliance, rebuild. I mean, you know, there's there's just for anyone out there, if you go to jnadvisor.com, I mean, you can even call me. My number is 646-588-8182. I know I'm going to be getting calls, but I'll take your calls. I'll listen. I'm more than willing to help out anyone go through this. I know how wretched it is going through the process and how hard it is on our families and loved ones. And, whether you're someone who has someone in prison that wants to get out, I could create a release plan for them to get them out, and to, but they got to be committed to build it. I'll give you another perfect example. There's been a lot of people, again, going back to how people value their freedom. It's weird how I could talk to someone and they don't value their freedom. They value their freedom differently. And, I don't want to do all that work. Or no, I have the three best lawyers in Manhattan that I hired. I don't think I need to do all that. And mitigation is the future of federal sentencing. And I think more lawyers are now implementing it. And there's a reason why my lawyer, who I hired for my case, became my first client. So when I came home, because he didn't think I was going to get the outcome that I did. He didn't think I was going to get out as quickly as I did. And he was always doubting me, saying, why do you got to do that? Why do you need that letter attached to the PSR? Why do you need the release plan? Why are you paying $400 or $500 a month in restitution 9 months before sentencing? If it's not 10, 20 grand, and I'm not putting him down. He's a great lawyer, but they don't teach those things in law school. Right? Mitigation, again, was only for capital defense attorneys. Why isn't all federal attorneys doing this for all their clients, for drug cases? Guys are serving very long sentences for, for things that, I mean, you've seen what you've seen. We all have unique experiences going. Unfortunately, it's to the same destination, but we all have unique experiences.
Yeah, it's a whole new world for them. What you're talking about, especially new cases. I mean, I was shocked by everything you were describing that you've done. I've never heard of that on the show, and I've interviewed over 500 people.
Really?
So I give you kudos for that.
I mean, thank you. I mean, it's interesting because when the top 1% law firms call me now, there's been so many instances where I say, I'm not going to work with him. Listen, a lot of these guys, C-suite execs, big hedge fund guys, or some celebrities, they're egotistical maniacs. They have a big ego, right?
Yeah.
And you have to put that aside. You have to, the government's here. You have to get to work. You got to push that aside. That's you have to start mitigating your case nonstop, 25/8, let alone 24, not even 24/7. Yeah, let your lawyers battle. Talk about case law and compare. But I have actually done better case law and comparisons now with the AI and machine learning. My lawyer can only do like 16 to 20 cases. I was doing 500-600 cases in history using machine learning. And so my lawyer was like, oh my God, he goes, I usually compare like 20 cases max. And I was like, you could do 200, so they should hire someone now with AI and machine learning. And I know a lot of law firms, a lot of big law firms that are getting involved with, getting good guys up that know how to, with machine learning and AI, because I said this on the American Bar Association, the Just Pod, it's called the Just Pod podcast. I said, the lawyers who are not going to embrace this machine learning and Google predictive analytics, because a lot of it is predictive analytics as well. If you can go over 10 to 12 years of sentencing history with a judge and see where he gave leniency and mercy, what were the mitigating factors, why he gave downward departures, there are certain profiles, right, for each judge, right? So they all, some of them are for the guidelines, some of them aren't, some of them, have all different circumstances where they give variances from. No two judges are alike. So the ones who really don't implement that, I'm not saying they're going to be left behind, but you're going to be you're not going to be a sought after lawyer in the future if you don't implement mitigation. Because right now we're moving to AGI, general intelligence. We're not in general intelligence yet. AGI is coming third quarter of 2026. Elon Musk just spoke about this recently. The AI we're in the first phase of AI, and general intelligence is going to have the PhD, the IQ of Albert Einstein, AGI. That's going to come out around September of 2026. And then after that is super intelligence, right? And they don't even have any idea. And I'm obsessed with this, right? I follow, I read as much about it. I took all my engineering, IBM and Microsoft. I got all my AI and machine learning engineering. They were nice, rigorous certifications, but this is the future. And, I wanted to reskill and upskill and redevelop myself, but I also wanted to bring as much mitigation to the future. So if 2 years from now, I want to still be standing tall as a company. 3 years from now, I want to still be standing tall as a company because I've absorbed all this education, and, I'm still going to be always trying to do better and learn more. And a lot of these lawyers that, my lawyer is all on board for mitigation. Now, this year alone, I had 126 cases that I consulted on, 36 new lawyer partnerships. And I just actually did a post on this LinkedIn the other day, 2 days ago. I did a 2025 recap. There was 26 cases where we had 86 to 92% sentence reductions. I mean, I'm having an outcome better than mine, right? Because I didn't implement any of this for my case. I mean, I just came forward and I basically turned myself in on a phone call from the SEC. Like the SEC just called me and said, "Is this Joseph?" Yes. I said, "Can I call you back in a few days?" Sure. Boom. And I just walked myself into prison, basically.
Joe, you're a funny guy. Well, Joe, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. We'll have the link to your website, to your LinkedIn, everything in the description of this episode for the audience. I'm sure you'll be getting calls from this. You made a good case. If I was still going through my situation, I'd definitely be hiring you.
Thank you kindly for having me.
Yeah.
Sincerely, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for being a terrific guest.
Thank you.